ශිෂ්‍යාවන් විශාල ප්‍රමාණයකට
This is the building at the Jinraja Balika Vidyalaya where students who were affected by an allergic reaction were studying. Inspection activities are continuing. News First arrived in Gampola to inquire about these incidents.
අප ගම්පල නගරයට පැමිණියා.
According to the teachers at the Jinraja Balika Vidyalaya, the first student who was affected by the allergy was in a grade 10 classroom. Thereafter, students from several other grades had informed the teachers that they felt faint and itchiness and coughing.
Prayers were held on Wednesday morning and a large number of students came to the grounds for assembly. The students then went back to the classroom. Later, the class teacher told us that the students have an allergy with symptoms of itchiness.
Meanwhile, a teacher at the school said that she too had these symptoms.
The students whose skins turned red with a rash were taken to hospital. When we went to see the children, we noticed that our skin was also turning red.
A showdown was conducted to clean up the school today. After inquiring about the situation at the Jinraja Balika Vidyalaya, we visited the Gampola Teaching Hospital. Although nearly 1,000 students who were suffering from an allergic reaction were brought in for treatment to the hospital the day before yesterday, all of them had been discharged when we visited the hospital today. They had not consumed any food which caused an allergic reaction. We also paid attention to whether the allergy was because of the drinking water, but that was not so. This is because the tap water comes from the urban council and a large quantity of water had not been used either. Then we had to look at a possibility of an external factor, something that was inhaled from the environment. News First also visited the houses of several students who were affected by the allergy.
We came to class after prayers. Then we went to the principal complaining that our bodies were itching.
An exact reason for these allergic reactions has not been ascertained as yet. However, the Ministry of Health stated that teams consisting of an epidemiologist, a gynecologist, a physician and a skin specialist have been deployed to conduct investigations in the areas where the allergic reaction was reported. Meanwhile, psychologists suspect that this could be a psychological phenomena known as mass hysteria.
So when you consider these facts, I think there may be some psychological origin underlying this. So there may be through cases with allergies, but so when we consider the other facts, I think the rest of the children have got these problems due to some psychological phenomena called mass hysteria.
A religious event was held at the Hunupitiya Gangarama Vihara in Colombo yesterday in view of the President's birthday and swearing in.
The event was held under the auspices of Gangarama Rajama Viharadipati, Venerable Galabodha Gnani Saratir. The religious event was organized by the Ministry of Industries and Commerce. Meanwhile, a Bodhi Puja and Pirit ceremony were organized by the Presidential Security and the President's staff at Temple Trees.
Canada has welcomed the public release of an internal UN report on the actions of the UN during the final months of the conflict in Sri Lanka. Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister John Baird said the report details a litany of human rights violations endured by the Sri Lankan people.
The head of the panel appointed to compile the report, Charles Petrie, submitted the finalized report to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in New York yesterday. The report highlights the failure of the United Nations and its agencies in the final months of the war and recommends steps to be taken to prevent future failures in tackling similar situations. Canada's Foreign Minister John Baird has said that the Prime Minister and himself take every opportunity to raise Canada's concerns with respect to the need for progress on reconciliation, accountability and respect for human rights in Sri Lanka. He says, quote, Canada calls on the Sri Lankan government to finally put the people of that country first, unquote.
Speaking on the 11th of September 2011, Canada's Prime Minister Stephen Harper called on heads of state to consider Sri Lanka's human rights record before attending the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting to be held in Colombo next year.
I intend to make clear to my fellow leaders of the Commonwealth that if we do not see progress in Sri Lanka in terms of human rights and some of the issues that you raised, I will not as Prime Minister be attending that Commonwealth Summit. and I hope that others will take a similar position, but I hope that this will pressure the Sri Lankan government to take the appropriate actions.
Meanwhile, the chairman of the British Foreign Affairs Select Committee, speaking to BBC's The Hub programme, urged UK Prime Minister David Cameron to follow the lead of his Canadian counterpart.
British government's human rights report confirms its concerns about human rights in Sri Lanka, and we as a committee had a hard look at this and rather agree with the Canadian Prime Minister that unless there is a big independently verified improvement in human rights in Sri Lanka, the British Prime Minister David Cameron should follow the lead set by Canadian Prime Minister and not attend the conference, the summit in Colombo.
In an exclusive interview with News First's Shamil Rasouldeen, who is based at the UN headquarters in New York, Sri Lanka's permanent representative to the UN, Dr. Palitha Kohona, said the internal UN report would not affect Sri Lanka.
Ms. Ambassador, the report, as you did mention, highlights the failures of the United Nations during the final stages of the conflict in Sri Lanka. Does the Sri Lankan government question the role of the United Nations during this particular time period in question?
You have to remember that the UN is not a supranational organization. It's an organization of member states. When the UN operates in a country, it operates within its mandate, whether provided by the Charter or by some other authority within the UN. It cannot act on its own, as has been suggested in places by the Petrie report. It is not an autonomous body. It has to be very sensitive to what the member states think, how the member states guide it, and how the host country looks at it. So in the circumstances, I think we worked with the UN fairly closely. Not only did we work closely with the UN, we invited senior UN officials to visit Sri Lanka on a regular basis. At the time, I recall that the Undersecretary General for the Office of Humanitarian Affairs, the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, and even the Chef de Cabinet visited Sri Lanka. There were many others as well. So we worked closely with the UN, and all the time being conscious that the UN is not a supranational authority. It is an organization of member states with clearly defined roles to play.
Mr. Ambassador, what are your observations on the content of this particular report in question?
I have a lot of reservations. For example, I think the Petrie report took for granted allegations which have been repeated over and over again about the number of civilian deaths. It almost totally ignored the fact that the government has conducted a very comprehensive census of people who lived in the northern province and elsewhere in the country, and which gave us a clearer picture of the number of casualties. It paid hardly any attention to the fact that many of the LTTs fought in civilian clothes, and they may have died simply because a combatant fights in civilian clothes and dies. He doesn't convert himself into a civilian. So many things like that seem to have escaped the compilers of this report, and I have serious reservations. And as a lawyer, I think this report can be challenged in many ways.
Moving back to news from here at home, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Sri Lanka has issued a statement on the independence of the judiciary.
The statement of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Sri Lanka says that in a truly functional democracy, the legislative, the executive and the judicial components should be able to carry out their responsibilities freely and solely on the basis of the accepted norms of the Constitution of Sri Lanka. The statement adds that whatever the differences the legislative and the executive may have with the judiciary, it should be resolved amicably. In the statement, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Sri Lanka says that the judiciary, with its specific role of being the interpreter of the law, should be respected and given its freedom to function as it should, and any interference in this is a serious threat to the rule of law and democracy. Catholic Bishops' Conference of Sri Lanka has called upon the executive and legislative stakeholders to address this issue and ensure that the freedom of the judiciary to function as it should be not violated under any circumstances. The statement has been signed by the President of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Sri Lanka, Malcolm Cardinal Ranjit, and the Secretary General of the Conference, Bishop Norbert Onradi.
Deputy Minister of External Affairs Neomal Pereira points out that the UNP leaders who went on to become presidents of the country contested the leadership of the party on an annual basis. He points out that the opposition leadership should change on an annual basis.
මම දකිනවා දුර්වල විපක්ෂයක් ඒ දුර්වල විපක්ෂය ශක්තිමත් විය යුතුයි කියන එක තමයි මගේ හැඟීම.
I can see a weakened opposition. I feel that this weakened opposition must be strengthened. What I ask God for in my prayers today is that the weakened opposition and the weak opposition leader would gain the strength to go before the government and the international community with the support of his party. The leadership of the opposition must change annually. J.R. Jayawardena held the party in the past by contesting the position of leader annually and allowing anyone to contest against him. Premadasa did the same. D.B. Wijayatunga followed suit. All past leaders have done this. Extending the tenure instead of contesting annually is the result of a weak leadership.
DB විජේතුංග මහත්මයාත් ඒ වෙනකොට එමයි කරේ මීට පෙර සියලුම නායකයෝ ඒ විදිහට කරලා තිබෙන්නේ දුර්වල නායකත්වයේ ප්‍රතිඵලයක් තමයි ඒ දීර්ඝ කර ගැනීම අවුරුදු පතා ඡන්දයකට නොයෑම.
පක්ෂයේ අවසාන තීන්දුව ගන්න තියෙන සම්මේලනයනේ. ඒ සම්මේලනයේ තමයි තීන්දුව ගන්න තියෙන්නේ. ඉතින් පක්ෂයට
The final decisions regarding the party are made at the convention. The decisions must be made at the convention. There are people who have struggled for this party for a number of years who participate in the convention. They have said that some changes need to be made. These changes are to prevent some of those people who struggled for the party from attending the convention. But the leadership has allowed certain persons who struggled for the party to participate in the convention. So these people who provided the leadership now have the chance on the 1st of December to show the people of this country that they will try to introduce these changes instead of waiting like silent ghosts and then departing like dogs.
නැත්තම් නිහඬව බිල්ලෝ වගේ ඉඳගෙන ඉවරලා ආපසු බල්ලෝ වගේ එළියට එන්නේ නැතු